Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Allison Schiff, one of the senior editors with AdExchanger, and today I've got a panel of smarties with me who are ready for some identity real talk, which I think is necessary. And personally, I've never said the words third-party cookies and cookie lists and identity resolution and sandbox more than I have over the past roughly 14 months, and I have a feeling that our panelists might feel similarly. Speaking of, we have Tina Moffett from Forrester, Jess Simpson from Publicis Media, and Joshua Koran from Zeta, but I'll get into slightly more detailed intros in a moment. Rather than rehashing the deluge of so-called thought leadership and speculative blah, 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 and in some cases, actual misstatements that have been circulating about what data loss and data deprecation really means for marketers, we're going to get practical and discuss the pivotal role that identity will play in the future of marketing, planning, activation, and optimization. And because there's a ton of confusion in the marketplace about the future of addressability, today we'll also dispel a few of the most common myths that have been adding to this confusion unnecessarily. A quick note on our agenda before we kick off. I'm going to more formally introduce our speakers in a moment, which will be followed by a roughly 20-minute presentation, well, actually a 10-minute presentation led by Forrester that'll then segue into a discussion of the aforementioned much-needed myth-busting about the future of addressability, and then we'll all convene for what I know will be a lively discussion with all of our panelists on that topic. Speaking of our panelists, Jess Simpson leads Publicis Media's verified and identity consulting and solutions teams, where she works across all regions, agencies, and solutions to bring identity strategy and capabilities to Publicis Groupe's media clients in a privacy-first way. Joshua Koran is head of Innovation Labs at Zeta Global, and as Zeta Global's representative to the W3C, thank you for all the tips, Josh. IAB, pre-bid, and WFA/ANA's Partnership for Responsible Addressable Media, or PRAM. Joshua is a world expert in digital privacy and one of the ad ecosystem's leading experts on the future of addressability. And we have Tina Moffett, a principal analyst at Forrester, serving B2C marketing professionals. Tina is focused on prescriptive and predictive marketing analytics, measurement strategies, best-in-class marketing and customer metrics, customer journey analytics, tools and technologies, a lot, that supports marketing insights and insights to action strategies. And it's to Tina that I'll pass the proverbial virtual mic shortly for her presentation. Although first, just a very quick disclaimer, the identity space is changing very rapidly. I think you're going to learn a lot today, but just make sure to keep your ear to the ground because there's just so much happening right now. Okay, Tina, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And thank you for joining us today on what will be a very lively discussion. My name is Tina Moffett, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, and I cover all things marketing and media performance measurement, but I also cover the topic of data deprecation. So as you can imagine, I've been extremely busy the past year and a half because of the changes of the ecosystem. Now, I'm excited to be here today to talk about how the changing marketing ecosystem will evolve, and more specifically, how identity plays a pivotal role in the future of marketing strategy and planning. And we're going to do some myth busting here in a few minutes. But first, let me give you a sense of what is happening in the ecosystem. As you can imagine, marketers, at least for the past 20 years, have had a plethora of data points and access to information at their fingertips. And this was really ushered in by the digital ecosystem and the advent of the internet. Well, a lot of this is already starting to change with what we're calling at Forrester data deprecation. Now, data deprecation, as we define it, is the reduction of available data marketers can use for data-driven strategies. Now, you may think that this is just inclusive of the third-party cookie deprecating, and that's a piece of it. But really, the drivers of data deprecation include 4 key pillars. First is consumer actions. We have seen an increase in consumer actually taking control of how advertisers and publishers really track them as they browse the web or on their mobile device. They're installing ad blockers, they're setting preferences to do not track, and they're actively clearing their browsing history. So that's one driver of data deprecation. Another driver is privacy regulations. So privacy regulations, which started with GDPR, and now on a state-by-state basis, there's rising privacy concerns and legislation being looked at, including CPRA in California. Well, these privacy regulations are really restrictive in terms of how advertisers can use their data for tracking and targeting purposes. So that's the second force of data deprecation. The third force of data deprecation is browser and operating system restrictions, which is largely driven by Google announcing in January of 2020 their intention not to support third-party cookies. It's further impacted by Apple's ongoing decision to not only stop supporting third-party cookies, but the changes in terms of access to mobile ad IDs. We're also seeing a rise of privacy-first browsers like Brave and Microsoft Edge. So that's the third pillar that is really catapulting data deprecation. And the fourth pillar is the walled gardens. These walled gardens, which we classify as the closed ecosystems like Facebook, Amazon, Google, and also the retail media groups, for example, Target and CVS having their own media companies, are restricting access to data for advertisers to pull out of their ecosystems so advertisers can get a full view of cross-platform performance and use those insights for targeting, measurement, personalization purposes. So these four drivers are really impacting modern marketing approaches in a very dramatic way. And let's take a look at some of the top ways it's impacting marketing. First, it's threatening most forms of online behavioral advertising. So the way that marketers use this data traditionally in the past was using behaviors to target future marketing and media efforts. With the third-party cookie going away and with restrictions from privacy and consumers changing their settings, that pool of information is getting smaller. Second, it resets the digital media buying ecosystem. For example, the third-party cookie was the mechanism to purchase digital media. It was the one key that would link between audiences and digital media and the digital media buying technologies. And with that going away, it really resets how technologies are able to go out and buy media and how publishers are able to push out their inventory for media buying purposes. Third, it limits most form of digital and mobile measurement with the deprecation of third-party cookie and with Apple's intention to limit usage of in-app data, it really hampers digital and mobile measurement. So marketers are not going to get a sense of what is truly effective across platforms and across their entire marketing mix. And finally, makes identity resolution harder. So when you have certain restrictions in terms of tracking, your ability to create customer profiles become increasingly difficult. And if you're a people first company that uses identity as a way to connect with customers, it really hampers your initiatives and your ability to do that. So this is how data deprecation is really going to stunt marketing. Now, there's a lot of news out there, and there's a lot of information that's correct, but there's also a lot of misinformation and lack of understanding of what data deprecation actually means to marketers. So today I'm going to be joined by Josh and Jess, and we're going to go through 5 myths and we're going to bust them. And not only will I provide my point of view from Forrester, but Josh and Jess will provide their point of view, both as a technology provider and on the agency side, to really set the record straight. So let's get started. So the first myth is eliminating unique identifiers will improve customer privacy. Now, a lot of the changes in the ecosystem has been done in the name of privacy, whether it's the big tech providers saying, we identified that customers don't want us to track them or to use this data for ad targeting, when in reality, proposed changes to the data access and identity is not a cure-all approach for privacy. We at Forrester do not want marketers to think that just because the major ad tech or the major technology providers are making decisions based on privacy, that those decisions are done in the best interest of the brand. They aren't. The brand needs to have clear permissions and privacy standards in place before they do anything with customer-based data. We recommend brands to embrace contextual privacy standards, and that means understanding what you can collect, how you can collect it, and how do you use it, and what information can you share to me and as an advertiser that I can use. Additionally, we want to make sure as brands are very transparent in terms of how they're using that data. So busted myth, proposed changes, it's not the cure-all approach to privacy. Our recommendation at Forrester is have the privacy standards embedded with your organization. So I'll pause here to see if Josh has anything else to add with this busted myth. Josh?
Thank you, Tina. So I think you covered it well, and I would also just add that the internet gatekeepers are not changing their own use of personal data when they're saying that they're going to be impairing others' access to personal data. So I think that we should also be paying attention to some of the competition regulation and investigations that are ongoing as to the motivations behind these actions.
Great, thanks. So the next myth is that addressability is going away with the recent announced changes. And in reality, permission-based addressability is still valuable and feasible across walled gardens. Closed ecosystems will support some first-party identity based approaches. So what we recommend at Forrester marketers to do is build a strategy that delivers value, transparency, choice, and that building a relationship that's appropriate. And that means across the whole customer journey, identify where it's appropriate to use addressable interactions. It may be mid to lower funnel, it may be further along the journey, but be very surgical with how you're using addressable information. Second is test first-party specific ad channels across third-party domain like YouTube and within Google. I think it's important to understand across these closed ecosystems what is viable from a targeting and measurement perspective in the addressable world. And is that viability of execution on the addressable side aligned with how you want to deliver value, if you're being transparent, and if it's appropriate depending on where you are in the relationship with the customer. And finally, experiment with alternative first-party channels like email, mobile, and direct to publisher. That provides a direct connection to the first-party authenticated data that you may have to another first-party authenticated data source, like to a publisher. Of course, those interactions need to be permission-based and should have the customer at the center of your decision to connect with them. But if you keep the foundation of value, transparency, choice, and relationship that's appropriate, you will find the best method to reach your customers. So with myth 2, Josh and Jess, would you like to chime in with kind of what you see and what you experience in your respective positions?
Sure, I can go first. I think in summary, what you said is true. There's not going to be a strategy that kind of solves for everything. So one of the things that we advise on is you're going to have to diversify your tactics and you're going to have to diversify your portfolio. And one of the elements you should be looking at when you think about the people you partner with is interoperability and transparency. And so there's a lot of fragmentation that's going to be shouldered by the industry as these solutions come to market. And so the splinter net, as a lot of people call it, is a very real thing. I also think that while addressability is still very much something that is going to be alive, it's going to be about 20% of the ecosystem initially, and there's going to be premiums on it. So you can't just go to market with it, because I think a lot of the same addressable constituents that one brand is going to target, the rest of the ecosystem is probably going to have the same access to, so you're not going to have a lot of exclusivity. So I think when you think about how to maybe go to market with that, everyone's kind of focused on the technology and the permissioning, but how do you actually use creative and content to drive the experience so that you are sourcing more data and you're sourcing more permissioning so that you can do more things with the data that you have? And I think that's maybe a couple of the points that are missing, is that there's going to come a point where the addressable universe, it just gets gassed. And then what's next?
Right.
I'm slightly more optimistic than you, Jess. I don't think that addressability is actually going away. Clearly inside the walled gardens, they'll continue to optimize and provide real-time feedback loops for the marketing solutions that they're offering. But as a marketer, as the third point shows, you want an omni-channel experience. And so I think what we're struggling to come up with as an ecosystem is how can we have the appropriate balance between the open internet and use of addressability across multiple different devices that are also using privacy by design solutions. So I'm actually optimistic that the organizations that are working on this will come up with that solution that then regulators will back.
Right.
And actually another point on the second bullet on the slide, I would even point out that it highlights that we're using marketers' first-party data, using a cross-site data transfer to improve advertising in a third-party context. So it's not like there's this whole divide between first and third party, because even the internet gatekeepers are supporting marketers' ability to continue to do cross-site advertising.
But you still got to get consent before you can use first-party data. So there's still an element of addressability, right? So that first-party data, I mean, the consent, it goes back to that risk, that consent, that onus is on the advertiser to build that pool so that the addressability pool is larger. Because in DV3 in the walled gardens, sure, they still let you use the one-to-one targeting in PG and PMP environments or programmatic guaranteed, but how do you cross-site? To your point, Joshua, that's limited, and that's a big thing for people who want to use their first-party data for customer suppression across DV360. We have a lot of clients who need to do that, and that is quite prohibited currently.
Great. So thank you both for your point of view. I'd love to jump to the next myth. And this one is near and dear to my heart, because I am by experience and an analytics person, and my coverage is measurement. And the myth is targeting without measurement is still valuable. And this is the biggest myth, I think, that people within the industry is talking about, saying, oh, well, because of data deprecation, you could still measure. I mean, you technically could still measure, but if you don't have a targeting strategy and look at the nuances of what you're measuring, it's it's important to look at it more cohesively. So to bust this myth, targeting without understanding impact leads to media waste. A hyper focus on any targeting approach without measurability across platforms will lead to a few key things. So if you don't look holistically at it or in conjunction with other marketing and media initiatives that you have operating at the same time, it'll lead to misattribution, frequency errors, and oversaturation of the brand message. Because if you can't control for frequency consistently across platforms, your message maybe just flooded the market and it could not be a positive brand experience. So we think at Forrester, you need to refocus your measurement ethos from did it work to did it deliver value? Now, this is really challenging to do because as a marketer, still organizations today are goaled on, like, did you acquire X percentage of new customers, or did you cross or upsell any type of product through retargeting or growing existing customer base. So did it deliver value was a fundamental shift from a I would say a product standpoint, product focused standpoint, to a customer focused standpoint. Now, for campaign and tactic measurement, there's alternatives in terms of measuring. So I think marketers, what we're recommending at Forrester is to really think about using panel, causal or cohort measurement. You could also lean on first-party data as well for marketing performance measurement. So if you're operating in a first-party domain, you're going to be able to measure more granularly as well. Consider data clean rooms to understand measurement capabilities. And I say that with a huge caveat because you're going to have limited ability to be flexible within the clean rooms outside of that ecosystem, and inquire how walled gardens will provide insights around marketing ROI and frequency analysis and understanding the long-term value of marketing. And finally, leverage aggregate marketing data for strategic marketing mix. We think that that should be a guidepost going forward, and shifting at the tactic and measurability at the tactic level is going to be needed. So I would love to get Jess's point of view in terms of what she's seeing on the agency side for measurability. So Jess?
Yeah, there was a lot there. And admittingly, I'm more of a technician than a data science expert. So I didn't do so well in statistics in college, but I'll do my best to kind of explain this and how our Center of Excellence is thinking about this. So the way that we're thinking about it, I think the biggest myth, honestly, to just kind of dovetail on this is people think, oh, a clean room is going to solve my measurement problems. False. Clean rooms are fantastic. ADH and Conversions API with Facebook, AMC, which is Amazon's clean room, the Trade Desk has one. Those are all fantastic for platform-specific walled garden intra-campaign platform optimization. So those are your publisher and platform-specific activities around media performance, KPI measurement, overlap frequency. I think what we have yet to see is a multi-party clean room that really institutes differential privacy in a way that allows less than cohort level type of data. And I'm not sure that we are going to see that. When you start extracting data from walled garden and publisher specific clean rooms, you're still at a cohort level. So because Google sentiment, everything is no longer at a user level, everything is going to be at this cohort based aggregate level. The concept of causal and econometric modeling is really coming front and center because that aligns well with those sentiments, as does mixed media modeling and optimization. So I think, from our perspective, when we consult and educate and advise clients, the first things we kind of say is you need to start building out benchmarking around viewability, because a lot of our clients are trying to kind of understand what the impact is there. And you need to get very comfortable with the fact that you're not going to be able to measure from a tactical standpoint what tactic, what creative drove a specific outcome. It's going to have to be more channel specific, more geo specific type of measurement. So I think that's kind of our biggest issue. And I think that frankly, the least mature you are in terms of your measurement strategy, the better off you are when all of this hits, because you have kind of less to lose. I think the more mature marketers are as it relates to their multi-touch attribution models and some of those things, they have a lot more to lose, because those are the types of measurement models that are going to be the most significantly impacted. And it's going to be tough. This is the most difficult space for us to figure out right now.
Great.
I agree. I would like to add on that, as you're talking about increasing media waste, we should remember what that does to publisher revenues. Because if marketers are no longer getting the same value they used to, they will pay publishers less. And that's my biggest concern about many of the threatened changes, is that it'll have this negative impact on the publisher ecosystem, the diversity of content that consumers want to access on an ad-funded basis. So I'm hopeful that we will not see the complete data deprecation that's being threatened.
Great. Great. So let's move to myth 4. Myth 4, cohort-based targeting approaches will meet all of your targeting needs. In reality, what we're seeing in talking to advertisers at Forrester is marketers need a more dynamic approach to targeting. At this time, cohort-based approaches remain unavailable. Specifically, when I say cohort-based, I'm talking about Google's Flock proposal. A lot of buzz and talk around it, but at the time, right now, it's still unavailable to GP. And so the efficacy of it is really, really unclear from our standpoint. What we do know based on Forrester research is that 49% of marketers are already changing their use of third-party data and audience acquisition processes. So they are seeking other ways for targeting. So what we recommend at Forrester is, look, test all your targeting options, but keep in mind that foundation of transparency, value, and relationship. Leverage that publisher insights to improve targeting and efficacy of campaigns. We believe at Forrester that publisher information is really rich and valuable, so you have the opportunity to interact more with publishers. Do it. And then finally, use permission-based retargeting approaches. I mean, you've heard the three of us talk about this. It's important to be clear and transparent and get permission for specific retargeting-based approaches. I'll pause here to see if Josh or Jess have anything else to add in terms of busting this myth.
So I can quickly chime in. I think you're right that to date, there's been zero evidence that cohort-based advertising is actually useful. So the widely cited 95% figure that Google promulgated, they've since stated in the W3C that it's their analysis to generate that 95% still relied on user IDs, on frequency capping, and on real-time feedback to feed the optimization models of their DSP. So it wasn't the cohort that was driving that. It was likely those three other aspects of actually having granular user IDs, frequency capping, and real-time feedback. So I think it's a shame that we don't have any statistics about how effective cohorts might be, but I haven't seen any evidence to date that they'd be effective at all.
Yeah, and I think with the delay that was just announced in terms of, flock testing and EMEA, we're probably not going to see that anytime soon. I think this is the publisher's time to shine, because I think the right solution is some sort of variation of ID-based and cohort-based. And so there's been some really interesting proposals coming out of the SSP ecosystem that I know we're really latching on to. So I'm really interested to see more coming out of that ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's definitely an exciting avenue to watch, I would say as well. And the final myth here is that long time delays for marketing performance data is acceptable. And the reality is marketers need what we call at Forrester right time insights to make decisions. We are not in the era of 30 years ago where we would wait 6, 8 weeks, and even longer in some channels to get performance data. Data is available at our fingertips. We, as marketers, become more mature and need to make split seconds decisions. They need access to that data very quickly. Now, the closed ecosystem may delay reporting 24 to 48 hours, which won't provide marketers the much needed insight. And to support this, in our 2021 BT marketing survey, we found that 30% of marketers cited that access to real-time data is their organization's biggest challenge. Now, we asked this out of 15 listed challenges. It came out as number 4. So there is a need to have that data at the time that marketers deem it necessary. So we encourage marketers to investigate performance data availability across channel and tactics. And then if data isn't available, to start to use proxies like past averages or industry averages for performance if data is not immediately available. And as an anecdote to support this a bit more, during COVID in March and April of 2020, when there was a shortage of supply of like toilet paper and household essentials, a lot of the CPG brands started to demand more real-time data from traditional avenues like television, along with digital data, because they needed to quickly shift communications and marketing budgets to notify people that, hey, in local markets, they had available household items. And there's no coming back from that. Now that they're able to do that, they're able to make those decisions very quickly and shift their media budgets. So Jess and Josh, anything else to add to myth 5?
I mean, we at Publicis, specifically Sapient, is building a whole practice around this called applied identity to optimize supply chain. So we see this as a fundamental gap and pain point for brands. And it's something we're absolutely leaning into publisher partners and trying to solve for.
I'd just quickly tack on that, just as with your prior slide that talked about the increasing media waste. If you don't have right time or real time feedback, you're wasting the budget proportional to that delay in getting the feedback. And asking any marketer how long they want to continue to waste money before they shift budget or change price or change their messaging, as you mentioned in your anecdote, I think is important to understand, not only for them, but again for the publishers, because if we're impairing the value they're able to provide, unfortunately, they'll make less money for the same content they're providing. And I think this real-time feedback is one of the under-discussed aspects in the ecosystem at the moment, because we should remember this is why real-time bidding actually so quickly and far faster than anyone would have guessed replaced the upfront media buying because of the effectiveness that it could drive.
Great. So those were our 5 myths that we busted. Hopefully the audience found it helpful in terms of how we communicate the reality of certain myths. So next steps in terms of developing a strategy for the to prepare for data deprecation. Some quick ideas in terms of what marketers can do to be more prepared. Develop a closed loop marketing and advertising approach. So this means that you need to make sure that your targeting, measurement, and optimization decisions lie in one place, and there's a feedback loop of how certain campaign or tactic or channel performed, where you should invest in, and then execute on this investment. Rewrite your data strategy with a customer first lens. You want to be sure that you have first party data built within your data strategy, but it's also permission based and it's privacy first. And that also means connecting with publisher partners to see if there's an opportunity to connect their first party data, or what we call second party data, with your first party data as well. Evaluate your ad tech and martech stack. I mean, this is really important. With the changes in the ecosystem, you want to make sure that your ad technology and marketing technology is preparing for the massive changes in the ecosystem. And then finally, build a cross-platform relationships. This means engaging with your agencies, your service providers to help connect data and use them and their brain trust to figure out what you should be doing in the future, but also looking at how the technologies can connect together and the data can be connected together to build those relationships as well. And finally, would like to thank the Zeta team for inviting me for my presentation. And at this point in time, we will begin the panel discussion part of this session.
Thank you, Tina. I'd actually love to start out, and we have about 15 minutes for our lively discussion. And I'd like to start out with what you started out with, which is the consumer, because you referred to consumer action as one of the driving forces behind data deprecation and just this general growing awareness of online tracking, which is an awareness that has been growing for a long time, and yet it still feels like this consumer gets sidelined. I think sometimes there's a lot of lip service about the consumer, but now really feels like a very good opportunity to rethink the value exchange. People are always using that phrase, how it should be presented and what it really should be. And I'd argue there's a danger that the industry is going to maybe miss that opportunity. So I'd love to hear what all of you have to say, about that. And if you feel like the consumer is finally going to be like at the center as promised for a long time. So maybe Jess, maybe we can start out with you, and then I'd love to open it up.
Sure, yeah. This is actually a passion point for me, as well as our Chief Digital Officer, Helen Lynn. So there's such a preponderance of misinformation in the ecosystem, and there's so much assumptions and interpretations and ambiguity in terms of what this all means. And if you're an average consumer and you're just even reading some of the testimony transcripts that are happening today on the Hill, it is extraordinarily confusing. And so I think that it is the fundamental responsibility of big tech and the platforms in the space to educate and partner with the organizations that myself and Joshua sit on to educate the consumer. Because, my mom, who is in Okoboji, Iowa, she is terrified someone is misusing her information. And, she's one of those folks on Facebook who is resharing things that are just simply not accurate. And my brother is a reporter in Hawaii, and he doesn't understand the concept, but he's reporting on it. And so I think it's like you have people who are really intelligent and smart, but they don't understand how their data is being used. And so I would argue that this crusade is really less about, from Google and Apple and some of these folks about consumer privacy and more about abuse of the platform. And I think it's time to stop the swirl and really just educate the marketplace in a way that they understand what is happening, why it's happening, and what they can do about it. Because at the end of the day, I'm not sure consumers want more choice. I think they want to be more comfortable with the choices that they're making, and they're still uncertain what those are.
I think that's very well stated, to be more comfortable with the choices that they're making. And actually, I'm curious what maybe Tina or Josh, like what you guys think about, with what Jess said kind of as the backdrop, like what associations, like the trade associations, what they need to do to step up on consumer education, because it's not going to happen magically. And then if you do leave it all to the platforms, then, .. Maybe we shouldn't leave everything up to the platforms.
But
Go ahead,
I
Josh.
can quickly go ahead, and Tina, you can jump in after. So, first off, I agree with Jess, and especially, we don't want to overwhelm people with choices, right? If we are asking them, do you consent to lookalike modeling? They're likely going to ask, what's that? And you say, well, what about frequency capping? And they'll ask the same thing. And then you say, what about all the other crazy terms we have in our industry? And I think if we step back and put ourselves in Jess's mom or brother's shoes, we'd probably say, when we deal with other ecosystems, they have supply chains. We should expect that publishers have supply chains too. And so instead of trying to present a line item veto to every possible supply chain vendor that a publisher might rely on to operate their business, if we're actually simplifying it to what is the information that's being used? Is it associated with an identifier or identity? And what is the actual risk associated with this? And one of the pieces I wrote recently, I compared cookies and said, we really ought to figure out, are these closer to nuclear weapons that really need military grade security? Is that the danger we face with these identifiers? Or are they closer to steak knives, where any technology, right, can be used as a tool or a weapon? How frequently are cookies really being used as weapons? Do we need to make everyone really that fearful of them? Now, we should call out bad actors just like we catch criminals. If you misuse a steak knife, hopefully you're going to go to jail. But we shouldn't be demonizing the supply chains that support publishers, because if we do, we will return the internet back to the CompuServe model of the past. And having lived through that era, I don't think that's the web that we all want. I think we want to give people more choice and more diversity of publishers that then have to rely on supply chains and often have to rely on ad funding.
So Tina, like how? I think that's all, yes, you're totally right, but how?
I think clarity and intent of how the data is being used is key here. I mean, if you think about, like, you visit a website, visit a publisher site, you're reading the news, the privacy policy and information in terms of how your data is being used is very overwhelming, and something that I think most people won't understand. So I think Josh brought up a really good point with we need to be clear in terms of how this data is being used, and I think that's a key to it. I do think that part of that is also explaining in plain terms the value that they're getting from it. Yeah. Better ads, better experience, and I actually think that the better way to talk about it is like a better experience on the website or with the brand. But I do think that there needs to be an element of simplicity, clarity, and not, as Josh said, not a check mark box in terms of how it's being used, because people don't understand concepts like retargeting or tracking or measurability or frequency of use. We do, but most people don't.
I think actually the problem is that the one thing people do sort of understand is retargeting, and that is their main association with online advertising. And it's often just not even creepy, it's like annoying. And that is the main association. When I tell people that I write about online advertising, they're like, oh, I know what you write about.
They know about retargeting, but they don't know the term. It's like my mom said, like, I got this ad, it follows me around Facebook, and like I saw it. And now
follow me on Facebook.
Now consumers are getting, I think, even smarter, because they're like, I talked about this the other day and didn't even search for it, and I'm getting ads. Yep. So I think consumers are getting smarter. So clarity and simplicity in terms of what you're doing with the data, I think, is key.
But talking on that one use case, right? If we wanted to limit the frequency, right, you need to remember how many times a given browser or user has been exposed to that content. And more importantly, if we could actually have a signal going back from the user to the rest of the ecosystem, enough already, I don't want to see that ad anymore, right? Pause showing me this ad. That would actually benefit not only the consumer saying, stop following me around and I'm tired of seeing the same content, but even the marketer, because they'd stop wasting their budget to someone who is not interested. So I think that we can set this up as a win-win, even though the debates are often phrased as marketers trying to fight with consumers. That's not a way to build your business. Marketers actually want to incentivize and entice people to engage with their brand.
And then maybe let's talk a little bit about first-party data, which came up, Tina, when you were talking about the different myths. So, I mean, of course, brands need to create this value exchange in order to grow their access to first-party data. But it's also true that not everyone has access to first-party data. And so, like, when you hear people talk about we need more first-party data, we need to build up those stores, what do brands do that don't really have that capability? You know, like what did they do in order to keep kind of playing, maybe not as they are because the world is changing, but in a competitive way that you know, helps them really, you know, just keep their business going.
Yeah. So I think of kind of a CPG in this aspect, CPG, FMCG, um, and manufacturers where they may not have first party data, but the fact of the matter is if they have a website, they have anonymous first party data coming in. And I think you start there, you start with all of your first party data and known customers, and then customers that you don't know that are coming in through the website, and use that as an opportunity to collect data directly from the customer. I think it starts there. And I think with we have to remember that a lot of the third party data, a lot of it's not cookie based. I mean, you can look at different avenues of collecting third party data that's not cookie based. I could tell you about your different types of customers, their buying behaviors, and things like that. So I do think that there are options out there to harness more first party data and have efforts to build that. But first party data is does not always mean like you know the person. It's not identifiable. It could be owned first party data that's anonymous as well.
And just what about the brand perspective on that, on first party data?
Yeah, so a couple things. You know, I think people think just because they have first party data, they're safe, but I think what they kind of forget about is just because you have it across multiple lines of business, like I think about, you know, a big entertainment brand that we support, or a financial brand that has multiple lines of business. There's a big component across heuristics and hygiene to first party data and sort of real time hygiene. And then you have to hydrate those records and keep them engaged. And so there's the technology. Again, I think people assume that if I purchase a technology that solves my issues around first party data, and yes, you know, linking a CDP to an identity to the ad tech ecosystem, that supports a workflow that enables privacy preserving marketing technology. But the first party data in and of itself needs a lot of love. And the CDP is sort of that center by which the TLC can be activated. And so you can unify and enrich and hydrate and apply all those heuristics to that data set so that it can be more efficient when it goes into the marketplace. And I think the thing that we're really starting to try to lean into, and interestingly enough, Google's one of the partners that we're starting to kind of lean into it with, probably because we're not doing as much one-to-one there, is how to use first-party attributes. And when I say that, I don't mean attributes associated to the individual. To Tina's point, when you think about the two most important data sets that an advertiser sits on, it is your first-party CRM data or sales data, but it's also your website data, it's your campaign data, anything that sits in a big cloud environment that math can get to. And AI is probably the most disruptive force that you'll see in 2021 and 2022, but it is also the thing that is going to help create the least amount of friction across the entire campaign cycle. And so we're trying to figure out how we can build into APIs and enhance math that already exists using AI, or build our own APIs so that we can differentiate. And maybe that's culling, you know, first party data attributes that live in a CRM set, or maybe that's pointing our math to a data set that we otherwise couldn't get to. But it's not about moving IDs around, it's about extracting value from the insights and then using that to inform how you go to market. And you know, maybe that informs your contextual or your creative briefs, or maybe that actually informs your just-in-time consent strategy, or to Tina's point, how you actually get people to authenticate and log in. So it's forcing people, the disruption is forcing creativity. And I think first party data is the foundation for universal measurement and targeting strategies. But there's more to that asset management than just activating the user IDs, you know?
So I unfortunately have to wrap it up. That went very quickly. Although in like 5 seconds, my very last question, which can be very quickly for all of you. I don't know if anyone from Google is tuned in, but if they were, what would you ask for in terms of clarity or just answers? Just like one burning question. If you could force them to answer it right now, what would it be?
I think Joshua should go first.
I'll happily go first. When will they implement the same restrictions on their own first-party properties that they're asking other publishers to implement?
Tina, what would you ask Google?
How are they going to ensure that media and audience is highly effective and fair across different ecosystems, and not have it be so focused within their ecosystem? Even though I understand it's they're their own ecosystem and they're putting their interests first, but advertisers are going to want Google's help or Google's insights with that.
You get the last word, Jess.
Transparency and interoperability. What are you doing to ensure that the voice of the marketplace around interoperability and transparency is heard, and you are helping to truly protect the little guys?
All right. Well, I mean, thank you, everyone. I feel like there were boatloads of takeaways. I mean, just a few that I like noted down from the myth part was just, the need to be surgical with how you use addressable information. Don't forget about the consumer, like we just talked about. Obviously, there isn't going to be a single solution for everything. Clean rooms aren't magic. Flocks aren't magic. And yeah, just keep your ear to the ground because things are gonna keep changing. So Tina, Jess, Josh, thanks for inviting me and for doing this. And if anyone has any questions about anything they heard today or anything identity related, they shouldn't hesitate to send them to webinars@zetaglobal.com. So yeah, never a dull moment in online advertising these days, am I right?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Allison.
Great. Thank you, Allison.